I see we have some people here already, but I'm going to wait until it shows up on my computer, my laptop here, so that I know that uh, I'm up and running. Hello, everyone. Um, you may have noticed that I tried to upload this a few minutes ago, and there were some interesting technical difficulties, to say the least. I've been talking around my phone on what this issue is going to be with some other people, and I think possibly uh, there were some shenanigans going on there. I'm not real sure, but it kind of looks that way to me. Uh, Regardless, we'll go with it now and see what we can do. Okay, I'm doing this from a slightly different location. That's part of the problem as well. So I'll go ahead and get started. And looks like we're up and running. The chat is on. I'm not going to address it, of course, for a little while. Wow, I'm just doing a lot of these lately, but this one I kind of have to do. Uh, a lot of you aren't going to like what I have to say here. And by the way, this isn't what you think it is. This is organic apple cider vinegar with the mother in it. And it's one of my health drinks that I do quite frequently, actually about every other day. Not every day, but about every other day. So it's not alcohol, okay? It's organic apple cider vinegar with the mother. If you don't know what the mother is, look it up on the internet. It'll explain it. It's kind of a fungus that grows in there, and it's really good for you. Okay. So it looks like I can go ahead and get started. I've got my glasses here. Everything's ready to go. I wanted to wait until David Knight's presentation, his news show, was over this morning. Then I checked to make sure that nobody's on right now, like the Duran or Mercurus or Christopher was earlier this morning, the new Atlas or any of those people, Garland Nixon. So I figured I might as well do this now, get it done and get it over with. It looks like my camera's a little skiwampus, but like I said, I'm in a new location, so we'll just go with it. And I think, it won't matter too much, even though it looks a little crooked. I guess I could drop it down a little bit just so it's not so obvious. Hold on a second. I'm always making these last minute adjustments, it seems like, aren't I? Let's see if that just takes away some of the... Yeah, I think that'll be good. That's at least tolerable now, okay? All right, so today is the 6th of February, 2023, and as I've been explaining over some time now, there's been a lot of discussion between myself and others about different things that are going on that, I stand against the traditional understanding of things, both politics and religion type things. But before I get into that, maybe what I'll do real quick is just bring up again what's going on, especially this balloon thing. You notice how it's taken on a life of its own now. There's a lot of coverage of that, and of course they're going back to the CVID stuff quite a bit. And I was wondering why all this was happening, and I don't know that definitively I can answer on the balloon thing, but I can say this. They're taking up so much time on it now that it seems like to me it's to keep us from looking at what's going on in Ukraine, what's happening to the dollar, to our economy. They like to distract you with all of these other things that are going on so that you don't look at the real problems. The real problems being that your IC is your enemy, that it's out there to destroy you, take away your liberties, your life, liberty and pursuit of happiness. That as the United States influence gets shut down around the world, what they're going to do is turn those weapons inward, as they already have, and as we've been warned about, that's what happens by the founding fathers of this country and others. They'll turn those weapons and already have in on us, and that we will be the enemy that they will go after. They're going to build this big new FBI center that's apparently going to be larger than the Pentagon. That should tell you everything you need to know about what these people are up to. So you have all these other things going out there. They really don't matter a whole lot. Even the balloon thing doesn't really matter that much. I mean, there are issues there, of course, defense issues and other issues, security issues. But by the same token, uh, as I've said, it's taking the people away from looking at what's really happening to them. Their standard of living is going down. We're staring at major wars right in the face. They want to take your sons and daughters. Eventually, they'll do that. Right now, they're taking your money, your treasure, and giving it to the military-industrial complex and these corrupt politicians, both in Europe and here. So it seems like to me that it's just the news du jour, the new story du jour for keeping you not really up on what's important to be concerned about. So that's all I'm going to say about that today. I'm sure all of you understand what I mean about that. I did that short live stream this morning, and then when I talked about that I was going to put this one up, I said this was going to be short and sweet. You know how that goes. So, because I was going to just do one part of this, and then I noticed that Cliff High, if you don't know who Cliff High is, he's a philosopher, he's basically a scientist, mathematician, some of these other things. I don't know all of his qualifications, but I followed him for quite some time. And this morning when I decided I was going to address this issue that was going to really tick everybody off, lo and behold, then I see this thing by Cliff High on Twitter this morning, which is kind of goes along with what I'm going to be discussing. And so I'm going to read what he said in his tweets this morning. And there's a possibility that the AI or that those who keep track of what I'm doing might consider this to be something they should censor, put me on another suspension or even take the video down. I'm not sure. So what I'll tell you is this: go to Twitter. You can go to Twitter even if you don't have an account there, and go look up Cliff, C-L-I-F, or better, do at Cliff, C-L-I-F _ high, H-I-G-H. Let me do that again. At Cliff, all lowercase, at Cliff, C-L-I-F _ high, H-I-G-H. Okay, and you can find his tweets there, or you can go to my Twitter account at Royston Potter, and you can see my tweet threads in regards to what Cliff High said here and expanding on some other things. Okay, well, we'll just get to it. So let me read this, but I might not read it verbatim. I'm probably going to substitute some other words for words that he uses here. And if you see the tweet, you'll understand why. Okay, so this is where we're going to start. Hold on to your seatbelts. I'm going to take you somewhere where you've probably never been before. And on top of that, I'm going to make some accusations, which I very rarely do. Okay, they're not so much accusations. They're more startling statements. Startling statements. So let me read this tweet. Let's hear by Cliff High so we can get started. So he made this apparently 3 hours ago today, and this is what it says. By the way, am I 5x5? Because like I said, I'm in a new location, and I'm not really sure how this is sounding. So maybe I should ask, am I 5x5? Everybody, can you see me and can you hear me? Okay, because this is going to be kind of important. Okay, good. Thank you very much. So we'll go ahead now. And this is what Cliff High said, okay? Here we go. So the whole multiple genders meme originates within that little Middle Eastern country that everybody gets upset with and that, kind of controls so much. Literature, including the Talmud and the Zohar, in there, stuff from Old Testament Torah is interpreted as the Elohim plural, space beings who came and conquered the Essene tribe in the Middle East, had 6 genders between breeding and male breeding females. Writers of Talmud Zohar said that the Elohim surgically altered their species in the womb to create these extra 6, which include those beings who were their enforcers that the Bible called archangels. Now, he's not entirely right about what he's saying here. For instance, he basically said that the Essene tribe in the Middle East, it really wasn't the Essenes, okay? I know why he goes there, but it really wasn't that, but he's linking it to that. So he's not entirely correct, but his overall thesis here is correct. Then he says, so much of this material is deliberately mistranslated. Let me read that all one more time. And again, I'm leaving out one word there just so I don't cause a problem. Okay, so the whole multiple genders meme, which we see today, it's being foisted on us, right? Originates within that religious and political community that sits there in the Middle East literature. And he, in parentheses, says the Talmud and the Zohar. In there, stuff from Old Testament Torah is interpreted as the Elohim plural, space beings who came and conquered the Essene tribe in the Middle East and had 6 genders between breeding male and breeding female. Writers of Talmud Zohar said that the Elohim surgically altered their species in the womb to create these extra 6, which included those beings who were their enforcers that the Bible called archangels. So much of this material is deliberately mistranslated. And what he's saying there is that the Talmud and the Zohar, which are actually, there are very good parts in these in this literature, very good parts, and they're very, very bad, evil parts. And I've talked about this before. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but there's, you know, the Black Talmud, for instance, and Black Kabbalah, and these types of things, which the Zohar has somewhat to do with. The Zohar means light and splendor. It's kind of what it means, bright and splendor. Anyway, so I saw that today, and I was planning on doing this thing, basically coming down on the too pure and holy, which is the second part of this. But when I saw this from Cliff, I thought, you know what? I'm going to include that, and I'm going to make it one big video. And so here we are. I'm going to set this over here. All right. In the title, you notice my first word is Golem, right? Or Gollum. This isn't the Lord of the Rings character that is, you know, this little guy who looks like he's an alien. Although the concept that was put together for Gollum in Lord of the Rings kind of comes from what I'm going to tell you here now, okay? I'm not pulling the wool over your eyes. I'm not leading you down the wrong path. Normally, I would not tell you to go to Wikipedia and look this up, but I've checked the site, and the information on golems there in Wikipedia is basically accurate. Okay, I've already checked it, and with my background in the study of Jewish mysticism, Hebrew, Talmud, Zohar, Sefer Yetzirah, the Bahir, and of course the whole situation with Kabbalah, you know, I can authoritatively comment on it. And so I looked at this thing in Wikipedia. And so if you want to know about what the golems are, it'll give you a pretty good idea there. And let me give you a basic background. So in Genesis, it talks about Adam in a metaphorical term. I've explained what this really means, but in a metaphorical term, it says that Adam was made out of the, you know, the dust of the ground, the clay, the dirt, formed kind of like a brick, and then the breath of life from God was put into the Spirit of God. And then Eve, of course, was fashioned from Adam directly. That metaphor has to do with you being formed from the ground in the natural process of procreation. That's really what that's about, whether it's in Eden in the immortal state, developing from the spiritual entity into a physical body that houses its spirit, the temple. Even the flesh in the first and second chapters of Genesis is in the immortal state in Eden, with the sexes and with all of that goes along with it. And I've explained that before. However, what happened with the Kabbalists in the medieval times, and even a little bit before, was they took the concepts of Heckalot, which they couldn't really use. Heckalot is using the divine names to get through the different levels of heaven and the different angels that guard those places. And it kind of moved over into Kabbalah, and they altered Kabbalah, and it got to the point where it just went too far. And eventually what happened is Aleister Crowley, for instance, went into the Black Kabbalah, which I just mentioned a few minutes ago, and really some nasty stuff happens there. But at any rate, going back to the medieval times, and again, you can check this, and there were some incidences of this even earlier. There were rabbinic Talmudic Kabbalists who wanted to create a soulless, sexless being, entity that did not have any free agency, that it was subject not to its own will or to the will of the great creator, the great eternal, but to the person who fashions the golem. Okay? Hi, Jesse. How you doing? I know this is a weird time, but I figured I had to get it up now because it was burning inside of me. As a matter of fact, when I first tried to put it up, I was talking in front of my phone with somebody, and they picked it up, and I couldn't even get the video to load. It stayed on waiting or something. And I thought, wow. So I had to take everything down and start all over again, and even change where I'm getting my my internet connection. But at any rate, so here we are. We got this situation where these Kabbalists want the ostensible reason for wanting these golems, these sexless, soulless entities, was that they would protect the Jewish people. They would be soldiers that could go out there, the enforcers kind of like thing, sort of what Cliff High is talking about here, these enforcers, which, of course, he considers to be archangels. But these golems were soulless creatures, sexless, soulless creatures. And I'm not saying they succeeded in that. The history in Kabbalism, again, I've studied this extensively, so I can tell you that there are, and it talks about it even in Wikipedia. I was surprised to see it there. There was a Rabbi Lowe, for instance, and a Rabbi, no, I forget the other guy's name, but there were a number of them that claim that they knew of other rabbis or they themselves that had created these golems, all right, using certain letters of the Hebrew alphabet and manipulating the energies around these basically clay creatures that they had formed, trying to copy what God had done in Genesis. But remember, what happened in Genesis was, as I've said, God formed this man, and then he breathed into him his spirit, God's spirit, and man became a living soul. So God gave you your free agency, and again, I'm talking about that's actually being formed in the belly of your mother. Okay, that's really what that's about, but metaphor is used sometime like this. Adam wasn't made like a brick out of clay. But the Kabbalists saw this and thought, maybe God's telling us that we can do this, because they consider themselves the masters. The people that control this philosophy consider themselves the Messiah without metaphor. I've told you that before. So they thought, oh, well, God's telling us how to do this. So they formed these different rabbis trying to form these golems, actually made these clay things, and then supposedly used some, I'm going to say magical names. They're not really that, but using magical names, they actually brought these things to life. Now that's the story. I'm not saying that it actually happened, but that's their claim. Now, let's look a little deeper and see what's really going on here. There is a force in the world, and it has two opposing sides. It has a righteous side and has an unrighteous side. And the unrighteous side wants to be God. The righteous side just wants to do what God tells them to do. They want to obey. They want to subject themselves to God and have those blessings. Righteous life, a good life, a promise of a reward with God and with your loved ones, all of those types of things. That's kind of what the righteous look for. Well, the unrighteous look for ways to control others. And we see that right now. I'm going to give you a name. I mentioned it before. Yuval Noah Harari, who is the prophet for Klaus Schwab. He is a Jew. He is one of these, let's just say he's married to this guy. Okay, that might be the best way to explain that rather than saying anything specific. And what he basically is saying in his entire thing, where he wants to embed you with these devices to control your thoughts, take away your free agency, make you a slave to their system. You see where I'm going with this? They took these Kabbalist ideas of making this sexless, soulless body, making it a slave, subject to their will, not God's and not their own, no free agency. And now Harari's saying they're going to use technology to actually accomplish that. So he's a black Kabbalist, okay? And he's saying, which is just the fact, that he wants to change you. You're already formed. Your clay's already formed. So they get to jump over that step. They get to just move ahead. And now they're going to change you into this sexless, soulless being. And he said it. You won't have any free will. They'll know what you're thinking. You know, they'll control your life. You'll have nothing and you'll be happy. Do you see the parallels here? So this idea that came out in the and I don't want to say that these Kabbalists of the medieval times were evil, but it showed where their mind was going, okay, to become God. And so here we see it in the modern time, and that's exactly what they're doing. They want you to become sexless. All of this dysphoria stuff that I've been talking about and what Cliff High said here again. Let me read that again, and you can go to Twitter and see it. Again, Cliff, C-L-I-F, or you can go to @Cliff, C-L-I-F _high. And he says, so the whole multiple genders thing, you see where I'm going with this? There's Baphomet, there's the denial. I mean, when you have that many, then there is no sex, okay? You basically destroyed the concept of male-female, which is why I've been so adamant about this subject for so long, because I told members of my family years ago, when I saw this movement building, and they would reject somebody like me who was trying to do an Abrahamic marriage covenant, which is accepted under the Bible, and they wanted to push these other social constructs. They said I was in a social construct, but they definitely were. And now it's gone to the point where you see what it's doing to us, and it's setting us up for destruction if we're not already headed there because we've gone too far. And it involves a whole lot of other things too. The denial of life of the very innocent young, who haven't even taken their first breath yet. You get my drift. And then once those people are out in the world, if they're out there, then now they're changing them so that they don't get to mature into what God intended them to be and having their own free agency and all that. They're being manipulated by these sophisticated spells, really is what it is, through the media, through the institutions that have been taken over by these same people. We call them Marxists or autocrats or tyrants or technocrats. But when you look at the history, there are these same people that were making or claiming to make these golems, or that's where they wanted to be. Again, I can't give you the whole history of it. It would take too long. I've studied all this in depth, and it's one of the reasons why I've been so adamant about this entire subject. And I'm going to go somewhere here in a few minutes a lot of you aren't going to like, and you're going to say I blasphemed and I'm a heretic. So be it. But now what they've done with their technocratic abilities, their technical abilities, is they're actually bringing this to pass. And much of mankind is falling into the trap. How many people got the OWS worldwide? Does anybody know? I'll just throw it out there. They're figuring about 2/3 of the world's population had at least one, and a lot of them had the series. And then they want to continue this every year to keep your programming up, right? All that stuff. And again, I'm talking in between the lines here. So let me read you what I responded to on Cliff High here. I want to read my response to him, if I can find it. And this is what I said in answering him. And I'm sure he knows about this Golem thing. Cliff High's a pretty smart guy. He's very widely read, studied, technically proficient, all of that, and I have a lot of respect for him. But I'm just giving a little more information just in case he didn't. This is what I said. I said to his statement that I just read, I said, correct. I have covered this here and on YouTube, but in somewhat veiled terms, as I just explained, for what should be obvious reasons. One of the later Talmudic Kabbalists, actually there were several of them, but I was talking about Low here with with what's called the Prague Golem, the Golem of Prague, Czechoslovakia. One of the later Talmudic Kabbalists claimed to create a golem sexless, soulless entity. Warning signs of the nature of this attack upon mankind are numerous. And then below that I said, let me explain a little further. Powerful people groups want to turn you into golems. I'm going to get out of the Twitter account here right now because I don't want it to interfere with my internet connection. So I'm going to get out of the Twitter account, okay? So I can't read that again. I'm done with it. All right, I'm going to get out of there, and I'm going to go to where I can just watch the chat, okay? So that's where we are now. All right. Yeah, they use dark arts, and it is. Like I said, there's a good Kabbalah, and I've shown you how the good Kabbalah works. Notarikon, breaking the words down into their letters and what the letters mean, and the rearrangement of the letters, as Isaiah actually did with the word for Koresh, Cyrus, the king of Persia. Okay, that's called Thashrak or Tamora, and also substitution of letters, right? And gematria, not numerology, but using the numbers of the letters to determine other coincidence or correspondences. That's all legitimate. But what the Black Kabbalists do is they use it as a magical formula. Making golems, soulless, sexless beings. The blueprint was set out by these Kabbalists in the medieval times and some even before that. And people like the technocrats who were trying to get the New World Order in, especially the Anglo-American Alliance, all of that, the New World Order, all that now Russia's fighting against in much of the world. Drawing away Turkey, as I mentioned this morning, Turkey and Hungary, the latest that are back in the. And then we see these multiple earthquakes happening in Turkey. No, I don't think that's a coincidence. I really don't at this point. And I don't mean to sound like a conspiratorialist, but these people have amazing weapons. Remember, there will be signs and miracles in the last days, only because we won't understand the technology. But they're using these technologies, I'm certain of it. So they moved into this situation where they've already got the bodies formed. That's you. And now, of course, they're talking about, having babies raised in these incubators, in these pods, right? Which is basically putting a golem together that's soulless, sexless, right? Because that's what they'll do it with. And then they'll put their spirit, rather than having God breathe the spirit of life into it, they'll put their spirit in it, which is a program that they themselves have made. And then you are a created being by them, which is making you what? A golem. Are you starting to see why now I have looked at this entire subject matter and why I'm so hard on Christians who deny the importance of the male-female relationship and even for Jesus Christ himself, however you view him. I have a slightly different viewpoint about who that man was, but that's another issue at this point. They've tried to destroy it, and it happened early on. This denial of Jesus having a family and being a man with all the rights, responsibilities, and joys and privileges was changed because they made him a golem for you so that you would follow that example. But you don't anyway. You still get married, right? A lot of you believe in Jesus who is supposedly celibate, but you get married. Why? Because God's law that's written into you says that's what you're supposed to do. And they have to conquer that. So how have they conquered it? Amusement, entertainment, constant MSM barrages, constant lies, constant deceits, things that distract you from the points of life, not light, that make you in God's image. And they've gone so far now that they can place nanotech in you in various ways. There are a whole bunch of ways, by the way, not just by the OWS. There are lots of other ways. We can see it now. They're talking about putting it in the food and other places to make you subject to their will, to make you golems, that you have a master, and that master is not God, but it's them. You see why we have to resist this? I don't hate these people that have this problem with they don't know who they are as far as sex is concerned, or they're confused, or I told you that there's really no prohibition in the Bible about two women being together, but it's not wholesome either. It doesn't fulfill their creation. And I'm not going to get into that. But between men, it's definitely wrong, okay? I'm just saying that. And all this stuff now might get me thrown off. But that's how it's looked at. So they want to destroy that. Look at Noah Harari, a perfect example. And he wants to create you in his image. He doesn't want you to be in God's image. As a matter of fact, he says, oh, some God that's floating out in space, you got to stop believing in that. We're the gods, is what he says. We're the gods. Do you hear what they're saying? And they hate women because they're the womb, the beginning, the house of the beginning of life. And they hate men because men, real men, don't put up with you messing with their women. So they have to emasculate the men as far as that's the reason why there was Gloria Steinem, this entire feminist movement, and all these things were all part of the desire to make you into golems. No longer male, no more female. What does it say in Revelation? I've quoted it to you before. And in that day, there will be no bride or bridegroom found. That's the end game for these people. There will be no. That's not God wanting that. That's what the evil side does. Makes it so the bride and the bridegroom is no longer found. And then you see these mistranslations and these translations in the New Testament in particular, various places I've talked about it, where there is no male and female. You don't understand what it's saying there because you don't understand the culture. Jesus says, if you, that in the beginning there was no divorce, but you can only divorce if there's a fornication, and that doesn't necessarily mean a sexual contact. It can mean that. That can be included, but fornication meant other things, and I've explained that before. Going and worshiping other gods is a fornication. That was a cause for divorce if the wife did that. If she refuses to do the duty of marriage. It goes the other way too. If the man refuses the duty of marriage, and that of course is the sexual act, if he refuses to do that, that's grounds for her to divorce him. It's all there. But they want to change that and make you non-binary, which is no longer in the image of God. And I've shown you, there's been this big argument about the tetragrammaton. Oh, it means the destroyer. Well, God said, I create good and evil. He is the destroyer, but he's a righteous judge. So there's both sides of that. He's an honorable king, a faithful king. El Melech Neaman, he's the faithful king. God, the faithful king. But he's also the punisher, the lamed, the one that renders judgment. So it all fits, but people run. It's like I told you, you got to be careful when you use Strong's and when you use Gesenius, because if you don't understand, I want you to go there, as I've said, but you've got to understand the other implications of things. You can't go running down the road and say, oh, this is a false God because this is the destroyer. Well, who destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah? Who brought on the flood? You see, you can't just toss these things out. And of course, as I've often said, context matters, vowel points matter, and these types of things, okay, when you're talking about the Hebrew. But I hope that my explanation here of what's happening in our modern world and what they're trying to do to you, what they've been trying to do since at least the Middle Ages, and apparently it went back all the way to the Garden of Eden, actually, the same process where they're trying to destroy that male-female relationship. It was the first attack on mankind recorded. Do you understand? I don't care if you believe in the Anunnaki and Enki and Enlil, the Sumerian gods, and you're trying to put all that together. He talks about here where these elves are manipulating their own genes to form these things. All that could be true. There's probably associations, connections with all this. As a matter of fact, Abraham, as I said, was from Sumer. And he was before Moses. He was from Sumer, so he brought a lot of the Sumerian understanding with him to Canaan. So these people that say, well, this is all Sumerian information. Yeah, Abraham was a Sumerian by nationality. but he was searching. Even in the situation in Sumer, in Ur of the Chaldees, he searched for the true God. And he found that God, and he was taken to a new place. Adam was like an Abraham. He was brought to a new place. He was taken out of the world and placed in Eden. It even says that in Genesis. God created the man, right? Formed him out of the dust of the ground. In other words, found this man that was born like Abraham, and he was a righteous man, and he took him and he placed him in a garden in Eden. He moved him just like he moved Abraham from Sumer to Canaan. It's all the same story. And these people don't like you following the real God. And you might not understand the real God. You might not have a concept of him that's other than you know he's there and you have an awe and respect for him. And that's all he asks. In his own due time and place, he'll show himself to you. But it's in his own time schedule because he knows you better than you know yourself. So do you understand now what we're up against? And why I have been, concentrating on this for so long. Okay, Wikipedia, go look up Golem, Golem. By the way, if we notark on that, it actually says that it's a traveler due to force. It's traveling through, but it's controlled by force. That's really what it means. In other words, it doesn't have a will of its own. Okay. No, I'm not the one that says all religions are from the fallen angels. No, I've talked about that guy before, and I'm not going to even mention his name. Somebody else kind of. He's also said that the male and the male-female body forms are the enemy, and that we are the fallen angels, and that everything about us is no, that's not true. What I'm telling you now, no fallen angel will tell you. I know who my Father is. I know who my Father is. I'm not a bastard. Okay. Now I'm going to transition to the thing that's really going to piss a lot of people off. Okay? You should understand now why I'm so adamant about honoring the male-female relationship. I'm not saying you have to get married. Matter of fact, I would rebuke the licensed marriages of the state. I wouldn't even go there, and I don't. As I explained yesterday, I married my first wife that way, and I forgot to say I did marry my third wife that way, but it was because I was being deployed on a rather dangerous mission, and I was afraid that if something happened to me, she wouldn't be able to get taken care of. So I married her legally too, but it was only for that reason. Would I do it again? No. No, I would not, because I lost faith at that point, is really what I did. And trusted Babylon rather than my relationship with God. I would never do that again. All right. Need a swig of my apple cider vinegar. Boy, okay. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Watch my Lord. I broke down like a little baby when Abba revealed himself to me. That's what happens. Okay. One thing about apple cider vinegar, it's great for your digestive system, and it resets the pH in your body. And if you have any diabetic problems, it's really good for that, which I don't have. Well, I kind of have a damaged pancreas, but it's not from drinking alcohol. It was from getting poisoned here back about, when was that? It's been about 9 years ago now. Oh, I didn't poison myself. Some medical professionals did it to me. I'll just put it that way. Okay. Now I'm going to say something that... So we kind of had a religious discussion, a spiritual discussion, but it's also politics. So what politics is, it's what's really happening in the real world. It's not just spiritualized. It's happening in the physical world. and you can't spiritualize everything that's in the scriptures. Abraham got to Canaan, and he planted a tree halfway between Ai, which is the world, or the physical, and Bethel, which is God, the spiritual realm. He planted this tree to symbolize that you have to have a balance between the spiritual and the physical. You can't spiritualize everything. You can't make everything physical. You have both attributes, and you're supposed to develop both of them. It's not sinful. If you use it incorrect, I mean, sure, men are told don't deal with prostitutes, and I showed you what the word for a prostitute is. It's trouble. It's got two lameds in the name. Two lameds. In other words, you're going to get slammed for it in one way or another, either cause and effect or something else. So it's just better not to go there. But you're supposed to have honorable contacts. Men are supposed to have honorable contacts with women. And I've told you, it can be a lifelong thing like it was with Abraham and Sarah, or it can be temporary on an agreement of a contract. And boy, they don't want to talk about that. You guys don't want to talk about that because it goes against what you've been told all your lives. Now, what do I consider to be the best? Yes, a lifetime devotion. Absolutely 100%. But is that happening in the real world? Does it? Occasionally it does. But it's not as often as you might think, especially not in our more quote-unquote enlightened society. I ran into some Mormon ladies here. I get out quite a bit and I talk to them. And this one lady says, well, I can't have anything to do with you because you won't go to the temple with me and get married for eternity. I do believe in that, as I said the other night. A man and woman that are rightly joined can go forward together and be heirs with God, with Christ. And that go forward means into the next world. And a lot of you don't want to accept that, but I read it to you out of the New Testament, out of Hebrews, I think. But I met these Mormon, and I have this conversation all the time. So this lady says to me, well, I can't have anything to do with you because you can't take me to the temple and give me an eternal marriage, temple marriage. And I said, well, now wait a second. Weren't you married in the temple on your first marriage? Then you promised to be married for time and all eternity, forever and ever. And she goes, well, yeah. And I said, well, how'd that work out for you? Fornication comes in there, not just the sexual contact outside of marriage. That's adultery. Fornication is a much larger grouping of things. And it does say, Jesus did say, if there's fornication either on the wife's part or the husband's, and it's all in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, worship other gods, you won't do the duty of marriage, you don't provide, you don't do your gender responsibilities. That's not the right word, but I'm just going to use that. And there's some other factors. Those are the fornications. Abandonment is a fornication. And a woman can do it or a man can do it. So it goes both ways. All right. Another swig of the apple cider vinegar, and then I'm going to say something that it's going to be disturbing to a lot of people. Jesse, I might need your help. I don't even know how you'll look at this. I'm wondering how Felicia will look at it too. But I'm going to say it. I can be pretty gruff when I need to be. I can rise to the occasion. I'm very mild-mannered most of the time, but you don't want to get me riled up. I can rise to the occasion. I can be very, very serious, or I can have a sense of humor. I look at things in Scripture, and some of them give me a laugh. Let me give you a little example. This isn't in Scripture. This is in an extra biblical text, extra New Testament. In other words, it wasn't included in the New Testament canon. There came a question as to whether or not the faithful could use money they get from prostitutes to give to the korban in the temple. That's the sacred offerings. And Jesus was asked about this, and he says, "Can prostitution, can money from prostitution be given as a korban, as an offering to the temple. And you know what his answer was? And I believe this. I think this really happened. He said, well, and he kind of laughed. It's even in the text. He kind of laughed. He says, well, yeah. They say he grins and he kind of chuckles. He says, yeah, it could be used for the priest's latrine. Okay. Guy's got a sense of humor. He wasn't just a strong guy that could throw people out of the temple and whip and beat the crap out of them. He wasn't just somebody that could talk about spiritual things and about righteousness and all that. He had a sense of humor too. So there's a lot more to this guy. And of course, I maintain that he's not the one that you see. This person really isn't the person you see in the New Testament. But that's a whole other thing. I've talked about the Teheb and the Samaritan. Jesus was even accused by the scribes and Pharisees of being a Samaritan. Why? Why? That goes back to Josephus. Josephus doesn't call it the Teheb. That's in the Samaritan literature, the Teheb meaning the restorer. But Josephus definitely talks about him, that he was the Samaritan prophet, and that Pilate did in fact crucify him because he tried to restore the ancient religion, the ancient Israelite religion. That's in my book, and it's in the Eisenman series and all that. Go look at that if you don't know. So here we go with the part that everybody's been waiting for. Okay. After this, I'm going to go. Well, I'll look at the chat. I'll take a few of these. Okay. So this is the story, or this is the statement I'm going to make. What is this too pure and holy that I'm talking about? Ladies and gentlemen, if you have small children in your room, you might want to, put plugs in their ears, or just have them go out and eat, get a lollipop or a drink of water or something like that. I'll give you a second to do that, because what I'm going to say is really for adults. All right. It's kind of like Genesis, where it talks about where do kids come from. Well, they say, oh, Adam knew his wife Eve, and the kid pops out, it's all kind of veiled. You talk about the stork, so I'm giving you a chance to get the kids outside. And I am going to be accused of being disrespectful, even blasphemous, and as a heretic again. But you know what? I'm telling you the truth. Think about it for a while. Don't start hurling rocks. Think about it for a while. Here we go. So Jesus, it's talked about in the Old Testament and in the New, that he would take upon himself the seed of Abraham. In other words, he would become a descendant of Abraham. And yes, I know he said before Abraham was, I am. I understand that. Saying who he really is. Okay, as Michael Heiser talks about the upper Yahweh and the lower. I know all that, okay. We talked about with Psalms 49 that there's an upper Yahweh and a lower Yahweh, and Psalms 49, and that there's a wife there. And other honorable women, I might add. Okay, but that's another story too. So he took upon himself the seed of Abraham. He became a man with all the rights, responsibilities, joys, connections, relationships that offers. If he did not, he would be a Golem. Do you understand what I'm telling you? So here we go. A lot of people say, oh man, you shouldn't talk like this. This is disrespectful. God knows why I'm doing it. Did Jesus defecate? Did he urinate? And here's the kicker. He was a man. Did he have nocturnal emissions? Wet dreams? If he didn't, he was not fully of the Abrahamic seed. I knew a young man once. He was a boyfriend to the daughter of a friend of mine. And this young man actually believed that women didn't defecate until they were 40 years old. Where would he get that? And people think that Jesus was so holy and so pure that he wouldn't become fully the man that he was required to become. He talked about the latrine in this extra biblical text, right? Of the high priest, that prostitution money could be used for that, right? He wasn't so holy and pure in the minds of so many traditional Christians who have this concept of him. They put him out of the realm of reality. Now, I used to have a friend. He's a traditional Catholic. He's kind of part of the ways here because of what I talk about here, and that's okay. I know I get a lot of people upset, but this individual, he was really tied up on this thing about concupiscence and about looking on a woman, that you shouldn't look at a woman and lust after her. Well, first of all, you can't commit adultery with a woman that's not married, because adultery is the violation of the marriage contract. So admiring a young woman that's not married is not adultery. And Jesus wasn't talking about that. He was talking about if you look upon another man's wife to lust after her and then start figuring out how you're going to get her away from him and imagining all the things you can do with her, now you're committing what essentially is adultery in your mind. You're still not guilty of it, though, until you actually do it. But it formulates in your mind, in your heart. That's wrong. Okay? You're not supposed to do that. A lot of people talk about onanism. Which is, they try to say it's the same thing as masturbation. As a matter of fact, Gonzalo Lira brought this up about a week ago, and I said, no, that's not the same thing. Onanism isn't masturbation. Onanism was a description of what Onan refused to do to fulfill the law, which was he was supposed to take his dead brother's wife and give his dead brother, through the natural course of events of sex with her, take her as a wife, a temporary wife, give her a child, and that child would belong to the dead brother. That was the sin that Onan committed, not the fact that he spilled his seed on the ground. Now, is sexual discipline important? Of course it is. I mean, if you're married, and I talked about this before, again, hoping no kids are in the room here. If you're married and you have a wife, you should be giving your strength, read between the lines here, your strength to her. You shouldn't be down on the couch or in some other room somewhere looking at porn and releasing nature, because you're actually committing fornication against your wife. Actually, it's even worse than that. You're committing blasphemy against that. This individual included said, well, wet dreams, that's not something you're actually taking control of to cause. So, that it's wrong if you cause it to happen. Well, I would disagree with that too. There's nothing in the scripture that says that. It comes out in one of the Pauline epistles. I think it is in James too, but it's under a different. People have to understand what's actually going on there. But at any rate, I'm not pushing that. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but you don't have to worry about going to hell. Okay, that's not what the issue is. The issue was denying the dead brother's right to have a child by his living brother with his wife. It's even mentioned in the New Testament, and I've talked about it before. One of the questions that causes this whole marriage controversy is when the scribes and Pharisees come up to Jesus and they say, oh, well, there's this guy who is one of us. So that kind of tells you who they are, because he had called these people vipers and serpents before. He says he was one of us, which already sets the stage, okay, that they don't have certain rights that they think they do. He says this man was one of us, and he died, and then his wife married another one, and she died, and that guy died, and this happened 7 times. Whose wife is she? Right? Under the law, she is the first man's wife, and that's why Jesus said, you don't understand the scripture. They're all supposed to be surrogate fathers to the dead brother, or accomplish that, which is exactly the situation that happened with Judah's son Onan and some other sons through Tamar. That's that story, but this one was tied to an insult by these Jewish leaders against some Maccabean heroes. And Jesus understood that culture, which you guys, most of you don't. And yet you want to say, oh, Jesus said there's no marriage, there's no marriage in the resurrection. Not for them. Not for them. I just told you about Hebrews. Man and woman would go together into obtaining an heirship together. So, Jesus wasn't too holy and too pure that he didn't have to defecate, he didn't have to urinate, and that he didn't have wet dreams or nocturnal emission. He was fully a man. I do believe he practiced sexual discipline. I do believe that, but he didn't withhold from his wife because he knew the law said that he has to perform the duty of marriage to his wife, and she to him. And if we start denying that, as the Christians have done for 2,000 years, because God wouldn't do something like that, hell, he came through a vagina to be born in the world out of a woman. Which brings up the other question that these traditional Christians don't want to ask. Did Mary menstruate, his mother? Was she so holy and pure that she didn't menstruate? Matter of fact, I saw a graphic once where it showed Mary, which is the way that they bore children those days. They didn't lay down, they squatted, and then the child comes out. And these Catholics are saying, oh, that's blasphemous. That picture is blasphemous, showing Jesus being born in the natural way. No, you're blaspheming God for creating you the way he intended you to be by denying these things. He didn't make a mistake, and he said so in the Garden of Eden. Why are you ashamed? I made you what you are. You are not to be ashamed for being what you are. No, you've allowed people to denigrate the creation of God and what you were supposed to be in his image. Okay, I've been going for how long here? Almost an hour. Wow, we've only got 287. I kind of figured that this would be one that would blow people out of the water. Jesus set the example. He did not refuse to do the righteous thing. And the righteous thing wasn't celibacy. Continence to some extent, yeah. The sexual discipline, yeah, absolutely. But he didn't withhold from his wife, and he had a wife. If he didn't, he was not the Messiah. Okay. Are they suggesting he flew out of there? I don't know. Roy, can you restate the references for Jesus' marriage? I've already done that. I did it in the last video. I don't have it with me. Psalms 45:9 is very important. Isaiah 53, where it says, when he makes a sacrifice for sin, he shall see his seed, and who shall declare his generation? The fact that Genesis 1 and 2 talk about the image of God being male and female, and Jesus was supposed to be in the image of God, so he had to have a wife. He had to. And there are others. I might list them again, but not on today's video. Okay. All right. You got okay. Here's a thing here. The remnant seed is quoting 1 John, and it says, "And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God, and this is that spirit of Antichrist." Where I'm going to tell you something. You better be careful with that scripture, because the concept of Jesus Christ that Paul had, and he often called him Christ Jesus, and I go through 1st and 2nd Peter, I go through Jude, I go through the Johns, the John epistles, and I show where there are Pauline insertions into the text, if they weren't Pauline from the beginning, with just some information from James to make people understand what they're talking about, to get past the denials. Okay, what you're saying is a Pauline principle, and it's a coercion. It's a force. Think about it. If you're told that if you don't believe in Jesus Christ, you're the Antichrist, what are they telling you? They're trying to use force to get you to bow down to their concepts. Be careful of those scriptures. Be very careful of anything. Jesus Christ is a principle. It's not even a person. I told you that yesterday. Christ, and the word for a king in waiting, the anointed king in waiting, is Mashiach in Hebrew. When it goes into the Greek, it's Christ. That's not a person. It's an office. And you are supposed to take upon you the name of Christ, the name of Jesus. Jesus, by the way, means he who saves. God's salvation is what it means. And it really is Joshua. The real name is Yehoshua, Joshua. Yeah, the same one that took over after Moses fled, or Moses died. So we're talking about one who saves is the anointed king. It's an office that was not his name. But we are to understand that we are to become like Jesus Christ, take his name upon us. That office, as I said the other day, with the image of God, Zelem, in Genesis 1, which means righteous judgment in the world. God's image in the world is a man being a righteous judge in the world. It's an office. It's not a particular person. So, to say that, there's another scripture and it goes, the Spirit of Christ is the spirit of prophecy. So if you have the spirit of that in you and you deny that you're a prophet, you're a liar. It's the office, ladies and gentlemen. The early Christians did not link it to an individual, despite what you've been told for 2,000 years. I'm not saying you can't put it that way. I do believe there was a guy, but not the Jewish guy, not the one Jewish by nationality, because the Samaritans were Jewish by nationality. Again, he was accused of being a Samaritan, and they just didn't make that out of hand. There was a reason they did that, because he was. Jesus Christ is a principle. As a matter of fact, many of the early people thought that it was a magical name. Magic. You are to be a Jesus Christ. You are to be a Savior, an anointed Savior. You are supposed to take that upon you and be that image in the world. But if you don't accept the person, then you're an antichrist. That's Pauline. Be very careful of that. Yeah, Mike Jones. Yeah, skin like bronze and hair like wool. Yeah, bronze is what they're actually talking about there is the color of the. Well, I'll leave that alone. I better not go there. I've given you enough right now. Roy, will you go over where Nicodemus mockingly questions Jesus how to get to heaven? It seems modern Christians believe you have to be born again, but Jesus actually said born from above. Well, yeah, the Hebrew actually, or the Greek actually means born from above. That means that you have, you've raised your level of principles. You've raised your awareness. You've raised your morality. See, in those times, one of the accusations against the Herodians was that, Jesus even said, they put away, well, the Christians, James, and even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they would marry their wives and then put them away and marry another wife and put them away. And even the women would do that with the men, right? So they didn't have any sense of responsibility and of justice and mercy. And if they did, they just ignored it. So yeah, it really does mean born from above. It means that you have a God orientation. In other words, the Zelem again. You're a man, a righteous man or woman in this case, that does righteously, that judges righteously. So you do righteous things. However, there are indications when When Jesus said, you must be born of the water and the Spirit, that maybe it did mean something very close to what Nicodemus was asking, but that Jesus chose to answer him in a way that the idea of righteous life was important. Because depending upon how you live this life depends upon where you end up on the other side. So when Jesus said, you must be born of the water and the Spirit, you're born in the water here. You're in your mother's womb, in the uterus with the amniotic fluid, and you're born in that water through the birth canal into the water world. That's what this is. This is a water world. This is mortality. I think the evidence is quite strong that you go through a very similar process in the resurrection. That's going to throw a lot of people. I can like that. I'm not saying I'm exactly right, but I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that's what he said was exactly what he means. So he didn't say no to Nicodemus. He just only gave him a partial answer. The female-male relationship is an eternal principle. It existed before you came here, it exists here, and it exists after you leave. And if it doesn't exist for you after you leave here, it's because you've done something that you've canceled out your right to take part in that relationship, which is also the image of God. Harari would be a good example of somebody who's going down that path. No, you see, Remnant Seed, you're saying John penned John, and I'm not talking about the Gospel of John. I'm talking about 1st and 2nd John. I'm not going to give you the whole scholarly dissertation because you come solely from a position of belief. Not really even faith, but of belief, because somebody told you so, or because you've been taught to think that way. No, there are definite evidences that there are Pauline influences in 1st and 2nd John. Not as many as in the Pauline epistles, but they show up. And those books, those epistles, weren't even written until around the 1st century, 100 AD or later. After all of this stuff had been squashed by the Roman Empire, the Council of Yavna, the Rabbinic Judaism rabbis, and by other people like Philo who had agendas. If it goes against Torah, or if it goes against what James said, there's a problem. And a lot of those are. So there's not, they can't even, Peter was dead by the time this thing was written. Well, it's true we don't have, and the Johns were too. We don't have the original manuscripts. We don't even know if they ever existed. So where does that leave us? I'll tell you where it leaves you. The 2 great commandments, which I also push all the time. All these dogmas and doctrines, even when I'm talking about with marriage, although that's a major principle, and its corruption has really ruined us all the way down to today. But the 2 main commandments are what matter. Love God, have reverence for him. You might not understand, you might have a concept of him, that's not unlikely, but have reverence for him, have awe, have respect. And 2, love your fellow man. If you do much more than that, it comes real close to doing evil. And there's a lot of that in the Pauline doctrines that show up. Like I said to somebody the other day, I hold on real fast to James. As a matter of fact, the people at Nicaea didn't even want to include the Epistle of James in the New Testament because it just wasn't Pauline enough for them. Where did Paul come from? He didn't even know the man. And James was the leader, and James told Paul, do not go to the Jews. You can go to the Gentiles and preach about Jesus and about, the plan of salvation. You can go do that, but do not go to the Jews. And he disobeyed James, who was the leader of the church. He was the bishop of Jerusalem, and Paul deliberately went and caused problems between the Jews and the people he was bringing in as Gentile converts. He did that on purpose, and that's why the Roman emperors got upset, because they saw these fights going on, these disruptions between the Jews and the so-called Christians who were really messianists. You don't understand the history because nobody will tell you. I'm trying to at least open your eyes to what's going on here. So I look at James, that's a litmus test for me. Torah, because we're talking about this entire culture. I mean, I could go talk about the Bhagavad Gita, Buddhism, and all these things, which are legitimate spiritual systems, but we're confining ourselves to the Israelite tradition and culture and religion, okay? At least what it was supposed to be. And in that framework, James is a litmus test. Torah is a litmus test, even with all of its problems. Frankly, the Dead Sea Scrolls are too, to some extent, but we're not going to go there right now. I have no respect for Pauline epistles or words unless he is quoting James at some point, because then he goes off on these other things. And I know what his whole deal was. It was destroy the Messianic movement of that time. In other words, to destroy the Messiah movement. Make it spiritualized. Put it in the spiritual realm. He didn't even say Jesus Christ, and that's one of the indications. I think it's in Peter. It may be in one of the Johns. But they don't say Jesus Christ. They use the Pauline term of Christ Jesus. That was definitely Pauline. And when that shows up, that means that there's a Pauline influence there. In Hebrews, as a matter of fact, I believe that was originally written by James in Hebrew, or maybe Aramaic, whatever, or at least one of his close associates. But things were added to it at some point in time. And then I think it's in chapter 10 or somewhere, the writer says that he has borne these imprisonments and things. And so Paul's revealing that he's putting his 2 cents worth into Hebrews and corrupts the whole damn thing. Have to rightly divide the word of God. I'm sorry I take so much time on that, but we've really got to stop thinking that this thing is immutable, ineffable, totally infallible. You've had 2,000 years at a minimum. I told you about Jerome the other day and about the change from the Hebrew and the Greek and the early Latin into the Vulgate, and the opportunities for change there, which occurred. And you don't think that you're being influenced by that today, or by political systems? King James, who had the King James Bible made sure that there were certain things in there, especially about submitting to authority. You think the messiness of the first century really believed in submitting to Rome? No. I'm getting a little worked up here, so I'll settle down. I think I'll stop there. I said this was going to be a short video, and we've gone for over an hour and 15 minutes. I probably need a little bit of, maybe I should go get a little scotch. Don't make Jesus so holy and pure that he wasn't a man. That defeats the whole purpose for the Messiah. The Kabbalists spiritualized the concept of Messiah. Enoch kind of spiritualized it, but that's allegorical imagery to show the importance of that. Not just that person, but the concept. And we think that that's literal. We literalize spiritual imagery, and we deny physical reality. And as Abraham planted that tree halfway between the physical and the spiritual, we don't want to do that, because we think Jesus is too holy and too pure to have done that. Sorry, I don't buy it. But the rest of it I'll leave to you. Yeah, I know, Ramesses. I know Peter authenticated Paul speaking about that. Yeah, I know. Isn't that convenient? Peter and Paul were at odds. If you look at the history, in the real history in Josephus, you'll see in there that was not the case. Just because Paul claims that Peter supported him doesn't mean it's true. Paul was called the liar, the spouter of lies. He set the brethren against each other. He accused them of what he was doing. I just told you, James said that he was not supposed to go to the Jewish synagogues and preach, and he did it in violation of his agreement. What does that tell you about Paul? No, I don't care what it says in Peter. Peter didn't like Paul, despite what, he was with James. Peter and James were together. Peter may have given in a little bit to Paul, but historically, no, that's not the case at all. Okay, I'm not going to get on that anymore. That's one of the problems with doing this. The traditional error is so ingrained and deep that the people are blind and deaf. And when Jesus said that he gave sight to the blind and hearing to the deaf, he meant that he was teaching them things that would open up their understanding. Not just the spiritualized miracles that you think it means. Let me just check a few things here real quick. Do not let the chains of the last 2,000 years keep you from searching these things out. I've talked about a lot of important stuff today and what's going on, what's happened in the past and where we are now. People accuse me of blasphemy and heresy. With what I know, I can look back at them, and if I wanted to be mean, I usually am not, but they're the ones that are committing the blasphemy and the heresy. But they're so ingrained in the traditions, in what they've been told they have to believe and how to interpret things, that I understand the labor that they're working under. But the reality is manifestly put before you every single day. But because you've been taught to spiritualize all those things, for instance, Jehovah's Witnesses. The Campbellites became what later were known as the Jehovah's Witnesses, and they preached that the second coming was going to be in 1914. Now people will say, well, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're not real Christians. Or the Mormons, they're not real Christians. Hear me out. Because you're guilty of the same thing. Evangelicals, born-agains, etc., etc. You're guilty of the same type of thing that I'm going to talk about here. You spiritualize things that were never intended to be that way. Not that there isn't a spiritual aspect, but because you don't want to believe that Jesus was married, you only talk about the bride being the church. Okay, you're spiritualizing it. When that allegory, that imagery, doesn't negate the fact that he was married. The New Testament doesn't talk about his bar mitzvah. Oh, he had one because he had a circumcision when he was 8 days old. There's no doubt that he had a bar mitzvah when he was 13. There's no mention of it in there. And people say, well, there's no mention of the marriage. I've talked about that. But just because you don't think it's there doesn't mean it didn't happen. You don't spiritualize it and say that he didn't do the physical. Remember, Abraham planted that tree halfway between the physical and the spiritual. It's a balance between the two. You don't have one without the other. Well, I kind of got off track there. So I won't contend anymore. I'm done with that. I'm not omniscient. I've said that before, but I'm also not blind, and I'm not deaf. I was trained to investigate. I was a police officer. I was an army officer. I was a military police officer. I did intelligence work. I know how to investigate. I know how to find lies. I know how to see inconsistencies. I know how, from my historical training, how to find people that are hiding the truth behind made up stories. Josephus, for instance, because he was trying to save his head, said that Vespasian was the Messiah. The Emperor of Rome, Vespasian, was the Messiah. You don't think that kind of thing didn't happen in the Pauline scriptures, in the Pauline epistles? They had to spiritualize Jesus because they couldn't have a physical man who claimed to be the king of Israel. It had to be otherworldly. And when Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world," he didn't mean that it's some ethereal place in the clouds in heaven floating around in some nebulous nothingness. No, what he meant is that his kingdom is not of this world, meaning the world of the Caesars, of the Herods, of the Persians, of the Assyrians, etc. That's what he meant. And this world is going to be your Eden when all this is done. When you've learned your lesson, when you've gone through the trials and tribulations and been able to put the scales off your eyes and unstop your ears and see what really is true, because it's manifest to you every day, not the social constructs of the Hararis and of the educational institutions, or even the institutionalized churches or those who represent them or came out of them. When you can drop those scales off your eyes and unstop your ears, you'll be a candidate for Eden. I don't know how I got used to drinking this. You know, when you do, it kind of squeezes your saliva glands on the side. Wow. I know I'm emphatic. Time is short. If we deny what God made us to be, we're going to be destroyed. Do you understand? Just like he did the fig tree. That doesn't mean you have to be a fig tree, as I said last night. You can be an apple tree, you can be a pear tree, but you want to do righteous things so that what you choose righteously to do can be sanctified. It might not follow the traditional concepts. And you certainly can't judge those who are on another path and say that they're in error. What did Jesus say about that? Take out the beam from thine own eye before you try to take the mote out of the other's eye. Christians always forget those things. Like calling me a heretic, which doesn't really hurt my feelings. What hurts is that they're proving who they are when they say that. They're the persecutors. And that's the history of especially the Catholic Church. And a lot of Protestants too. Look at the Salem witch trials. Women who were trying to heal people with herbs and natural. I'm not saying there weren't probably some people up there who were doing some black magic stuff. By and large, that wasn't the case. It was mass murder, justifying it through scripture that's misinterpreted. And if you continue to do that, you will be the receiver of that same judgment that you mete out. Thanks for coming, ladies and gentlemen. I'll leave you there. Yeah, Maurice Wilson. That's what I thought. He's been drinking joy juice. No, this was apple cider vinegar. And I said that because I knew people would say, oh, he's giving this dissertation. He's out here talking about the spiritual stuff and he's drinking, alcohol. He's having whiskey or scotch. No, this was apple cider vinegar. I'm not a health nut, but, I exercise. I take care of myself. I watch my weight. I watch what I eat. Every once in a while I break down and, I'll have something like a piece of pie or something that I really shouldn't. And of course I'll enjoy a scotch, not every night, but, occasionally. But no, this was apple cider vinegar today. And I told you, when I'm giving spiritual discussions, I won't have scotch, whiskey, beer, whatever. I won't do it. Thanks for coming, ladies and gentlemen. You're being distracted by all these things that are happening so that you don't see that they're taking out your money from your bank accounts, that they're destroying your children, that they're doing these wars and trying to set up your destruction, changing your biology, changing what you were created to be, denying the bride and the bridegroom. Anchor yourself in manifest reality with spiritual righteousness. I don't know how else to put it. Don't spiritualize everything. It won't work for you in the end. Y'all take care out here for now.